She didn't see the push coming. 1 second, the bathroom mirror reflected a pale face trying to swallow back tears. The next, a hand slammed her shoulder from behind, sending her crashing into the sink. Amara Fields, a small black girl who had just transferred to Millstone High less than 2 weeks ago, slid down onto the cold tile floor, her books scattered, a puddle spreading beneath a broken hand dryer. Standing over her was Derek Langston, leader of the Iron Crest Group, a calculating junior with power. Rumor had it his father had deep ties with the town council. Amara clenched her fists. She didn't scream, didn't fight back. She swallowed the pain, eyes fixed downward. Thought you could just ignore us, huh? Behind her, Tyson Grant blocked the door. No one else was around. Just the flickering light, the dirty floor, and her own breathing. But what they didn't know, this would be the last time she stayed silent. Amara tried to stand, every movement sending a sharp pain through her ribs. Her hand trembled as she picked up her soaked math book, its cover torn. No one came in. No one had heard anything. Derek leaned down and tapped the cracked mirror. You think you're better than everyone here? Amara said nothing. She knew one wrong word could make things worse. Tyson nudged her leg with his foot, taunting. Can't even look up? Just what I thought. She glanced at the door. No way out, no teachers, no student dared interfere with Ironcrest. Derek exhaled and smirked. Don't expect anyone to help you. Around here I make the rules. He turned to leave. Before walking out, he pointed at her torn notebook. Pick up your trash, newbie. The door shut. Amara stood still, breathing in fragments. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't cry. Amara bent down to gather the wet pages, her palms soaking up the cold from the floor. A musty smell lingered from the corner of the room. Her hands shook, but her gaze began to change. Not just fear anymore. Just 2 weeks, and she was already a target. Not because she'd said something wrong, but simply because she existed. Different. Quiet. Alone. She hugged her books tight and stepped into the hallway. The bell rang, signaling class time. Students flooded out like a wave. No one noticed her. No one knew what had just happened. Amara merged into the crowd, trying to keep her back straight. Each step made the bruise on her side throb, but she didn't stop. On the way to class, she thought of the letter from her grandfather, the one she found tucked in an old book about the town's history. Back then, she thought it was just worn-out words. But now, everything started to feel different. English class began. Amara took her seat, carefully opening her notebook as if no one was watching. But she knew Derek was right behind her, and he knew she was afraid. Ms. May's voice rose from the front of the class, calling for volunteers to read aloud. When it was her turn, Amara stood. Her fingers gripped the edge of the paper. Her heart pounded. He stepped into the dark room. Her voice trembled. A few quiet laughs rose behind her. Derek and Tyson whispered something. Just one word could send the classroom spinning in her mind. Still, she kept going, sentence by sentence, word by word. Though her voice shook, she stood tall, didn't lower her head, didn't give up. When the bell rang, Amara closed her notebook. Derek leaned in close. Don't get too comfortable. This is just the beginning. He walked off, but this time Amara didn't flinch. She watched him, unblinking. Something inside her had begun to shift. After class, Amara hurried toward the school gate. She usually took the bus, but today, her feet took her somewhere else. She needed air, needed to think, needed space to make sense of what was happening to her. The late afternoon sun cast a warm orange over Millstone's roof. She stepped across the grass, her heart still pounding from the class. Then came the voice, familiar, calm, calculated. Where are you headed, Amara? Derek, leaning against the iron gate, phone in hand. Next to him, Tyson, a shadow that never left. Amara didn't answer. She tried to look calm. I asked you something, Derek pressed. What, you scared? She turned slowly. I have somewhere to be. Derek raised an eyebrow. Sure, see you tomorrow. Amara walked away. No running, no rush, just one step at a time. And inside, she knew the fight was far from over. The small apartment was quiet when Amara returned. Her mom was still working the night shift at the grocery store. Only the soft hum of the fridge and the warm kitchen light greeted her. She dropped her backpack onto the chair, wincing as her bruised eye brushed the table edge. The ache reminded her that it hadn't been a nightmare. She didn't call her mom, didn't say a word. They had just moved here. Her mom believed this was a fresh start. Amara didn't want to crush that hope. Instead, she went to her room, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old book, one her grandfather had left behind. The cover was peeling, the print fading. On page 92, she found the letter. Yellowing paper, slanted handwriting, warnings about those in power in Millstone and off-the-book money and a family that controls everything behind closed doors. One name was underlined in red, Langston. She froze. A strange feeling rose. This wasn't just personal anymore. Amara lay awake in the dark, unable to sleep. Her grandfather's words repeated in her mind like a pounding drum. He had once served as Millstone city clerk. The letter described what he had seen: shady transactions, protection deals, and most of all, a name: Richard Langston. Derek's father? She shot up, flipping through the pages again. At the end of the letter was a short note. If you're reading this, it means my time is up. Find the iron box. It holds what they tried to bury. Amara shivered. An iron box? She had never seen it. But she knew there was only one place it could be: the old house they lived in before moving to this apartment. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but something in her gut said if she found that box, she'd never have to fear Derek again. The morning at Millstone High was cold and gray. Amara walked quickly through the halls, avoiding every glance. Her stomach twisted at the thought of facing Derek, but she kept moving. Now she had a purpose. Among the crowd, a voice called out, Amara, wait up! She paused. A tall boy in a football jersey with soft curls and a serious look stepped toward her. I'm Jalen, he said quietly. I saw what happened yesterday. Amara tightened her grip on her backpack, silent. I'm not with them, he added, but I know they're dangerous. If you ever need someone to listen, I'm here. A moment of silence. Amara gave a small nod. No thanks, no promises, just... For the first time, someone had taken her side. And that was enough to keep her standing. At lunch, Amara stood in line at the cafeteria, holding her tray, eyes fixed on the floor. The noise around her made her feel small, like she didn't exist. A hand slapped her shoulder. Move it! Tyson! He shoved past her. Oh, sorry, he said mockingly. Didn't see you there. Around them a few students looked, then turned away. No one spoke up. No one stepped in. Amara clenched her fists, her knuckles pale. She wanted to yell, to talk back, but her grandfather's voice echoed, Silence only protects the powerful. She said nothing, but this time she didn't shrink. She stepped out of line, left her tray behind. And inside it, a decision began to form. Amara found a quiet corner outside, beneath the shade of an old tree and a weathered brick wall. She sat, pulled a granola bar from her bag, chewing slowly, but tasting nothing. From afar, Jalen was practicing with the team. She saw him glance her way, then return to drills. He didn't approach, but he noticed. That small gesture eased something in her chest. Her eyes scanned the parking lot. A red pickup was parked boldly in the faculty zone. The license plate was familiar. Derek's truck? Amara squinted. No student could park there, unless someone was looking the other way. Her grandfather's letter came back to her. The money, the favors. She began piecing it all together. Something much bigger was shielding Derek, and maybe she had just found his weak spot. At the end of the school day, Amara quietly left through the back gate. She didn't want to risk running into Derek again. The sky was dim and gray. The rustling trees whispered as the wind swept through. Amara hurried toward the bus stop, then paused mid-step. She didn't get on the bus. Instead, she turned toward the old neighborhood. The little blue house where she and her mother used to live just months ago. It was empty now. The new owners hadn't moved in. She remembered clearly. The side window always jammed, never locked. Her heart racing, Amara placed her palm against the glass. Inside was dim, covered in dust. She hesitated a moment, then pushed gently. The frame gave way, and she slipped inside. Not to run away, but to start digging for the truth. The old house was cold and silent. Every step Amara took echoed on the rotting wooden floor, dust curling around her shoes. Everything remained. As if time had frozen. The faded curtains, the torn armchair, the musty smell tangled with memory. She headed straight for the storage room behind the kitchen. Her grandfather once kept old books and strange tools there. No one was allowed to touch them. An old wooden trunk sat in the corner. Amara knelt and opened the lid. Inside were family photos, a worn album, a few letters, and at the bottom, a small metal box, its lock rusted. Her heart pounded. She grabbed a rusty wrench from a nearby toolbox and pried it open. The lid popped. Inside, aged, yellowed documents, receipts, photocopied payment records, and in the lower right corner, one bold printed name, Richard Langston. Amara flipped through the pages, eyes fixed on numbers, signatures, and stamps. Large sums of money passed through shell companies. Some receipts were labeled rezoning fees, silence retainer, school board contributions. In several photocopies, Richard Langston stood beside faces Amara recognized, a man who had spoken at school weeks ago, a PTA member, even Principal Wells. All of them appeared in this decaying pile of paper. Amara's hands trembled. This wasn't just proof that Derek's father was manipulating the authorities, it was the reason Derek kept getting away with everything. She pulled out her phone, snapped photos of every page, every word. Then she closed the box and carefully stashed it in her backpack. For the first time, she held something that could make Derek afraid of her. On the way back, Amara sat alone in the last row of the bus, late afternoon sunlight casting a soft glow on her thoughtful face. She didn't know what to do next. Give the evidence to the principal? She wasn't sure he wasn't involved. Send it to the education board? Who would believe a 16-year-old with a stack of old papers? She thought of her mother, working hard, unaware. Her grandfather, who believed the truth should be preserved even after he was gone. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jalen. "You okay? You look tense today." Amara stared at the screen, then typed quickly. "I need to talk. Can we meet after school tomorrow?" She couldn't do this alone. And now, she didn't have to. The next morning, Amara arrived at school earlier than usual. She waited in the second-floor hallway, quiet and less crowded. Jalen appeared, hair still damp, one earbud in. He saw her, pulled it out, and frowned. "What's going on?" Amara nodded slightly, pulled him out into a quiet corner near the lockers. She glanced around, then unlocked her phone and scrolled through the photos. Derek's dad. He's involved in bribery. So are some adults at this school. Jalen stared at the screen, silent for a few seconds. "Where did you get these?" "My grandfather's old house." He swallowed, then nodded slowly. "My brother works at the local news station. I could send this to him." Amara took a deep breath, nodded. For the first time, she didn't feel hunted. She felt like she was striking back. The bell rang for first period, but Amara's mind wasn't in class. Her hand clenched her pen, eyes fixed on her notebook, unreadable lines blurring before her. She knew once the photos were sent, there was no turning back. If Derek found out, if his father found out. During recess, she quietly met Jalen behind the library. He showed her a message on his phone. "These files are valuable. Reporter will verify and follow up. Stay safe." Amara's hand trembled slightly as she read it. Her heart beat like a war drum, not from fear but from hope. They sat in silence for a while. No words needed. When Jalen stood up, he looked at her. "Are you doing this for yourself?" Amara stared toward the courtyard where Derek was laughing with the Iron Crest boys. "Not just for me," she said. "For everyone who's ever stayed silent." The afternoon passed like a tightly wound string. Amara didn't speak to anyone, trying to appear calm, though her chest roiled with tension. After school, she and Jalen agreed to meet by the bleachers, quiet, away from crowds. Amara arrived first, standing still as a breeze tousled her hair. Jalen came, slightly out of breath. "My brother sent the files to an editor. They'll check the sources and publish if verified." Amara nodded. "We need to move fast. If Derek finds out..." A voice cut in behind them. "Planning something, Amara." She turned. Derek stood there, eyes dark, with Tyson right beside him. Jalen stepped in front of her. "This doesn't concern you." Derek smirked. "Oh, but it does, very much." Amara felt it. This moment would change everything. The air thickened between the three of them. Amara stepped back slightly, her fingers tightening around her backpack strap, eyes on her phone inside her jacket pocket. Derek stepped forward, voice calm but cutting. "Heard you've been snooping near the old neighborhood. Curious about my family?" Tyson squinted, stepping closer to Jalen. "You know what we do to snitches, right?" Jalen didn't move. "We're just standing here. Don't start something." Derek glanced at Amara, eyes drilling into her. "You think you're special. But don't forget, we still make the rules at this school." Amara said nothing. Her hand slid into her pocket, fingers closing around the phone. One press and everything would be sent. She didn't need to win by force, she just had to hold her ground a little longer. Derek took another step forward, voice deepening. "You think a few old papers can touch my family?" Tyson snored, but his eyes no longer held the same mockery. Something in Amara's silence made them wary. Jalen leaned toward her, whispered, "Send it." Amara nodded slightly, but before she could act, Derek lunged and ripped the phone from her hand. It all happened in a flash. "Let's see what you've got here," he growled, eyes scanning the screen. Amara instinctively dove forward. "Give it back!" Tyson grabbed Jalen, pulling him away. Meanwhile, Derek flicked through the photos, his face slowly darkening. "Bitch!" he snarled, raising his arm to smash the phone. But Amara didn't back down. This time, she attacked. Amara lunged, slamming her arm into Derek's just before he could throw the phone. The jolt sent the device flying, landing to the grass near the bleachers. Without thinking, she dove after it, knees scraping the ground, snatching it up. Her hand shook, but she locked the screen before Derek could grab it again. Tyson let go of Jalen, shouting, "Get her!" But his voice was drowned out by a whistle from the field. A teacher was approaching, eyes narrowed. Derek stepped back, growling through clenched teeth. "You don't know what you've just done to you." Amara, breathing hard, stared him down. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done, and you should start worrying." The teacher drew closer, so they turned and walked away. Amara stood, dust clinging to her shirt, bruises on her hands, but her mind had never been clearer. The teacher only asked a few brief questions before walking away, clearly not wanting to get involved. Derek and Tyson disappeared into the crowd of students leaving practice without another word. Amara dropped onto the bleacher bench, still clutching her phone. Her heartbeat hadn't settled, but she knew one thing. She had kept the evidence safe. Jalen sat down beside her, rubbing his shoulder from the earlier scuffle. "You okay?" "Not really," Amara whispered, "but everything's still here." She unlocked the screen, fingers trembling as she tapped to send an email with all the photos to Jalen's brother. Once it's sent, she exhaled like a weight had lifted off her chest. "Now, it's no longer just in my hands," Jalen nodded. "Now it's in the hands of the world." The two sat quietly, watching the sun dip behind Millstone High. The battle was just beginning, but Amara was no longer alone. That evening, Amara couldn't eat dinner. Her mother still wasn't home. The apartment was as quiet as usual, but inside her a storm churned. She turned on the desk lamp and reread her grandfather's letter, for what felt like the 100th time. The shaky handwriting, the ignored warnings, now more vivid than ever. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jalen. "My brother says the paper received it. They're verifying everything. If it checks out, front page." Amara gripped the phone tighter. She should have felt relief. Instead, it felt like standing before a storm. She knew Derek wouldn't stay silent. Not with his pride, not with the Langston name dragged into the light. She double-locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and whispered to herself, "I won't break tonight, because tomorrow everything might change forever." The next morning, Amara woke earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, the air heavy like before a downpour. She skipped breakfast, her mind stuck on one question. Has it been published yet? As soon as she stepped into the school hallway, she felt it. Something had shifted. Students huddled in small groups, whispering. A few glanced at her, some curious, some wary. Jalen rushed over, face pale with nerves. "It's out," he said quickly. "They didn't name Derek, but there's a photo of Mr. Langston and details about shady transactions. It's all over social media now." Amara's heart tightened. She pulled out her phone, opened the news site. "Powerful Millstone family under bribery scrutiny. An anonymous student provides the documents." No mention of her name. But people would know, especially Derek. And then the bell rang. It had begun. The first class passed in an unusual silence. No whispering, no laughter. Eyes either averted or glued to phones hidden under desks. Amara sat in the third row, spine straight, gaze steady, though inside she was wound tight. Derek was absent. Tyson, too. Ms. May entered with a stack of papers, about to speak but paused, scanning the room. Something was off. She glanced briefly at Amara. A short look, but loaded with unspoken thoughts. Then she quietly began the lesson. Amara wrote a single line in her notebook. "Silence is also a voice, but yesterday I chose to speak." During recess, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I know who you are. This isn't over." A chill crawled down her spine. Amara stared at the message, fingers frozen. No name, no profile picture, but she didn't need to guess. That tone, it was Derek. She swallowed hard, heart pounding. Her instinct was to delete the message, but instead she took a screenshot and sent it to Jalen. A minute later, his reply came. "Don't respond. Keep the evidence. Be careful." Amara nodded to herself. She slid the phone into her pocket, trying to walk like nothing happened. But her shoulders tensed every time someone passed. In the cafeteria, a group of unfamiliar students watched her, whispering. Some smirked, some nodded slightly. Amara didn't know what they thought, but one thing was certain. The truth was shaking Millstone High, and amid the chaos she had to stand firmer than ever. That afternoon, Amara was called to the principal's office. She walked slowly through the hallway, each step echoing in her mind. Behind the door, Mr. Harmon Wells sat with two unfamiliar men, dressed in suits, eyes cold and professional. "Amara Fields?" one asked, voice calm but firm. She nodded. "Yes." "We're with the local investigation agency. We need to verify some documents you submitted to the press." Amara glanced at the principal. Mr. Wells avoided her eyes, fingers laced, his face tense. She took a breath. I found them among my grandfather's things. I didn't change anything. One investigator opened his notebook and began taking notes. Amara didn't know what would come next, but for the first time her truth was being heard. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. Questions focused on the metal box, the letter, and the connection between her grandfather and Richard Langston. Amara answered clearly, even as her heart pounded. She held nothing back. There was no reason to anymore. As they wrapped up, one of the men nodded. You've been very brave. We're investigating suspicious financial activity tied to Mr. Langston. Your documents are valuable. Principal Wells sat motionless, hands clenched on the desk. The other man turned to him. We'll also need access to internal school records, especially donations from the Langston family. Amara stood, bowed politely, and left the room. She walked into the hallway with lighter steps. What once made her tremble was beginning to crumble. And she had lit the match. The rumors spread like wildfire. Within a single class period, all of Millstone buzzed. Were those actual cops? I heard Mr. Langston is under investigation. Think Derek's going to get expelled? Amara walked silently down the hall, whispers brushing past her ears like cold wind. Some looked at her with admiration, others with doubt and judgment. Jalen caught up near the stairs. Did they treat you okay in there? He asked softly. Amara shook her head. They listened. They believed me. Jalen smiled faintly. Good, but it might get riskier now. She looked out toward the schoolyard, once Ironcrest's domain. Yeah, Amara said, but this time I'm not running. And she kept walking, head high, no more hiding. At the end of the day, Amara packed her books slowly. The hallway emptied, leaving only echoing footsteps in the dim light at the far end. She was about to leave when she saw Ms. May Whitmore waiting at the door. Amara, she said gently, can you stay a moment? Amara stepped forward, her heart tightening. Ms. May led her to a side hallway, voice calm but serious. When you read your essay the other day, I felt something was wrong, but I stayed silent. She paused, her gaze softening. Now I know that was a mistake. Amara was surprised. She never imagined a teacher could feel powerless too. You've been incredibly brave, Ms. May continued. If you need anything, resources, protection, or just someone to listen, come to me. For the first time, Amara felt like an adult was truly on her side. Amara left school as dusk settled in. Streetlights blinked on in clusters, casting a quiet golden glow. She walked slowly down the sidewalk, her backpack heavier than usual, but her heart a little lighter. She passed the small grocery store where her mother worked. Through the window, she saw her mom restocking shelves, face tired but resilient. Amara stood for a moment, just watching. She didn't go in. She didn't want her mother to worry. Not yet. Back home, she dropped her backpack, sat at her desk, and opened her grandfather's letter again. The ink had faded, but its meaning was stronger than ever. The truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs to last long enough and be heard at the right time. Amara touched the signature at the bottom like a silent promise. The fight had begun, and she wasn't backing down. On Monday morning, a fog of tension and rumor hung over the entire school. While students whispered and exchanged hushed speculations, Derek was still nowhere to be seen. But then came another shocking update. Richard Langston, Derek's father, had just been taken into temporary custody for investigation. Amara got the news from Jalen, who pressed his phone into her hand during recess. On the screen was a major news photo of Richard handcuffed, stepping into a police car. She stared at the image for a long time. That wasn't just a man being arrested. It was the symbol of a system that once silenced her. Jalen looked at her and said quietly, Do you realize, without you this never would have come out? Amara clenched her fists. I don't need them to know my name. I just need them to know the truth won't stay buried. Right after class, Principal Harmon Wells announced a school-wide assembly in the auditorium. The air was tight with unease. Students murmured. Teachers moved with caution. Amara sat next to Jalen in the third row. On stage, Mr. Wells approached the podium, his face more tense than ever. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the microphone. In light of recent events, I want to be clear. Millstone High does not tolerate harassment, abuse of power, or corruption in any form. The room was silent. He continued. We are cooperating closely with authorities and conducting a full internal review of school operations. Jalen leaned toward Amara and whispered, They know now. Amara stayed quiet, but inside she knew what once felt impossible was beginning to take shape. After the assembly ended, students stood up quietly. No usual chatter, just eyes, many of them glancing toward Amara. A girl she'd never spoken to before approached hesitantly. "Thank you, Oshika, for doing what you did. Derek humiliated me in chem class once. No one believed me." Amara gave a small nod. No words needed. She understood. On her way back to class, a boy leaned in and whispered, "You made them realize they're not untouchable anymore." That sentence echoed in Amara's mind like a small hammer cracking the invisible wall she had lived behind for weeks. Though no one said her name out loud, people knew, and one by one they were starting to stand with her. The fear hadn't disappeared, but for the first time it didn't hold the power anymore. That afternoon, as Amara left class, she saw Jalen waiting in the hallway. His face was thoughtful. "Did they say anything else to you?" he asked softly. Amara shook her head. "No, but today, a lot of people started looking at me differently." Jalen smiled. "Because you did what they were too scared to do." They walked out into the courtyard together, the space that once belonged to the Iron Crest boys. Now none of them were in sight. "I heard Tyson is transferring schools," Jalen said quietly. Amara wasn't surprised. When the roots of power crumble, those who leaned on them can't stand either. She paused, gazing at the changing sky. "I don't need their apologies," she said slowly. "I just needed to know I didn't stay silent. That's enough." Jalen nodded. "And you're not alone anymore." That evening, Amara sat at her desk under the glow of her lamp, going through the photocopied documents she still kept, each number, each signature a piece of evidence, and a reply to every time she was forced into silence. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, not a threat this time. "Thank you for doing what we couldn't. I was pressured into silence by Derek last year. I don't know your name, but I'm grateful." Amara read it again and again, eyes stinging. She didn't need to know who sent it. She just needed to know she wasn't the only voice anymore. She picked up her phone, opened the photo of her grandfather, the one of them on the old porch. "I'm carrying on your part now," she whispered, and for the first time she truly believed it. The next morning, the atmosphere at Millstone High felt lighter, as if the whole school had shrugged off a heavy weight. When Amara walked the halls, a few eyes met hers, not with suspicion anymore, but recognition. A boy nodded at her. A girl smiled softly. No loud words, but enough. She entered class and saw Miss May standing by the window. The teacher turned when Amara came in. "I have something for you," she said, handing over a packet. "Scholarship applications. Your grades qualify, and if you need a reference, I'll write one." Amara froze. This wasn't a reward. It was trust. She nodded and accepted the papers. For the first time since coming to Millstone, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was finally starting to live. She was finally, During recess, Amara sat beneath the large tree at the edge of the field, once a hiding place. Today, she sat there by choice. Jalen walked over with 2 water bottles and handed her one. "Just heard from my brother. The story's expanding. They're publishing a part 2 with a new witness." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Not sure, but it's not a student. A former teacher, maybe. Someone who was pushed out by Langston." A chill ran down Amara's spine, but she also felt a strange sense of calm. The truth had moved beyond the school's borders. It was spreading. She looked toward the empty sports field, once Iron Crest stage. "So no one controls the story anymore," she said. Jalen nodded. "It belongs to everyone who was ever silenced." That afternoon, as Amara was packing up her books, Ms. May appeared at the classroom door, her gaze gentle but somber. "Can we talk for a moment?" They stepped into the quiet hallway. Ms. May was silent for a few beats, then said, "I was one of the people who knew and chose not to speak. When Richard Langston started funding the school, some of us protested. I was one of them." Amara went still. "I wasn't fired, but I was reassigned, lost privileges, and I stayed silent, afraid to lose everything." Ms. May looked at Amara, her eyes filled with both gratitude and remorse. "But you broke that cycle. You gave me the chance to stand again, this time without stepping back." Amara didn't say anything, but in her heart, that apology, though unspoken, felt like real healing. That night, Amara sat at her desk, the soft light casting a glow on her grandfather's photo and old letter. She touched the final line. "Silence protects the powerful. Truth may be fragile, but it outlives threats." Her phone buzzed. A message from Jalen. "The new article is out. A former teacher confirmed everything. The school's calling a meeting for all staff and parents." Amara set the phone down, not opening the article just yet. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. A quiet beam of light after the storm. She stood up, folded the letter, and tucked it into the drawer with the documents. They weren't a burden anymore. They were proof. Tomorrow people would still talk. But Amara had done her part. The truth had been sent. The next morning, Amara arrived at school to find a crowd gathered near the bulletin board. Amid the murmurs was a bold announcement. Special meeting for all parents and faculty, Friday, 6 p.m. Topic, internal investigation and school policy reform. Jalen appeared beside her, hands in his jacket pockets, nodding toward the sign. No more backing out for them now, he said quietly. Amara looked around. Some students who once stayed silent were now speaking openly. Some teachers moved through the hallway with stern expressions. No more pretending not to see. A girl Amara had never spoken to before passed by and whispered, "Thanks for making them take a second look." Amara nodded silently. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, and for the first time it didn't carry any shadow. As the dismissal bell rang, Amara walked slowly across the schoolyard, a place that had once been full of sneers and cruel stares. Now no one blocked her path. Jalen walked beside her, hands in his pockets, same as always, but his steps felt somehow lighter. "I heard Derek's not coming back," he said quietly. Amara paused. "Transferred?" "Sent to live with relatives out of state. No one's saying much, but you know what that means." She nodded slowly. There was no joy in her, no satisfaction, just a weight lifting gently from her chest, like a door quietly closing. "I don't hate him," Amara said. "I just wanted him to stop hurting people." Jalen nodded, eyes on the horizon. "You made that happen, and you're still you." That evening, Amara got a call from her mother, the first real conversation they'd had in days. "Are you okay?" Her mother's voice was low, touched with worry. Amara hesitated a moment, then answered, "I'm okay. But there are some things you should know." And she began to tell her about Derek, about what had happened, about her grandfather's letter and the documents in the metal box. Her mother was silent for a long time, then exhaled heavily. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said. Amara smiled softly. "It's not your fault. I've learned how to stand on my own." Her mother's voice trembled. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you." Amara looked up at the ceiling, imagining his face in the light. And for the first time in all of it, she felt truly understood. The next morning, Amara arrived at school earlier than usual. On her desk was a folded piece of paper, no name attached. She opened it. The handwriting was messy but sincere. "I used to laugh when you were bullied because I was scared of becoming a target too, but now I feel ashamed. I'm sorry." Amara didn't know who had written it, but the note touched her more deeply than any spoken apology. She folded it and tucked it into her bag. It wasn't forgiveness. It was proof. Something was beginning to change. Class started. Ms. May entered, her eyes meeting Amara's for a moment, then giving a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement. Amara sat up straight, eyes forward. No more hiding, no more shrinking. For the first time she felt this classroom belonged to her too. During recess, Amara stepped into the courtyard where students usually gathered. Today no one avoided her like before. A few eyes met hers with welcome. A few smiles appeared without needing a reason. Jalen waited near the bleachers holding 2 cartons of milk. "Thought you could use some calcium after this week." Amara laughed and took one. "You really know how to cheer someone up." They sat together on the wooden steps, watching the schoolyard come alive, as if it had never known darkness. The wind stirred gently through Amara's hair, carrying a rare peace. Jalen looked up at the sky. "See that? People are starting to speak, starting to stand up." Amara nodded, eyes drifting toward the row of classrooms. "And if someone else ever goes through what I did," she squeezed the carton in her hand, "they won't have to face it alone." That afternoon during homeroom, Miss May made an unexpected announcement. The school will be hosting a special seminar about student rights, anti-bullying, and creating safer learning spaces. A student raised a hand. "Who's going to speak?" Ms. May smiled and looked at Amara. "Someone who understands this best, if she agrees." The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to her. Amara froze for a moment, heart pounding. She didn't like public speaking, but this time silence was no longer an option. She nodded slowly. "I'll speak." Jalen, seated behind her, clapped first. Then one by one the whole class joined in. Amara smiled, small but real, because she knew this time her voice would be heard. It wouldn't be swallowed by the dark. That night, Amara sat in front of her mirror, practicing the words she would share at the seminar. On the desk was her first draft. written with shaky but determined handwriting. I used to believe silence would keep me safe, but really it only protected those who were doing wrong. She read it slowly, then looked up at her reflection. The girl in the mirror was no longer the one who hid in corners. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jalen. "I'll be in the front row. If you get nervous, just look at me." She smiled and replied, "Thanks. But this time, I won't need to hide behind anyone." Outside the window, the night breeze whispered. She gently placed her hand on the page where the first word stood alone. Truth. Friday morning, Millstone High's auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, and students sat in silence. On stage, a banner read, "Seminar, the Right to Speak, Anti-Bullying and Student Protection." Amara stood behind the curtain, gripping her speech. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Ms. May stepped over, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for everyone who was ever forced to stay silent." Jalen sat in the front row, eyes steady. The announcer called out, "Please welcome Amara Brooks." Applause rang out as she stepped forward. Lights shone in her eyes, but she didn't blink. Amara stood center stage, raised her head, and looked out at the hundreds before her, and she began to speak, in her own voice. "My name is Amara Brooks," she began, her voice firm but not forced, "and I used to think staying silent was the only way to stay safe." The auditorium fell silent. "I've been shoved in bathrooms, blocked in hallways, threatened in silence, because everyone thought no one dares to touch those guys." Her eyes scanned the audience. "But one day I found a letter from my grandfather. In it he wrote, 'Silence only protects the powerful. Truth may be fragile, but it outlasts threats.'" A soft whisper rippled somewhere in the room. Amara pressed her lips together, then ended the first part with a clear sentence. "I'm not here today because I'm special. I'm here because I finally chose not to be silent." Amara took a deep breath and continued, "During that time I had no one on my side, except one friend. He didn't promise to fix everything. He just said, 'I believe you.'" She glanced at the front row where Jalen sat. He gave a quiet nod. "Sometimes that's all someone needs to stay standing." I started to act. I searched for the truth, I reclaimed my voice, and through that I realized... She paused. The audience waited. Bullying isn't just between a few students. It's the result of indifference, of people who pretend not to see. And if we want to change that, each of us has to face it head on. The whispers faded. The air turned still, but honest. Amara stood tall. She wasn't just sharing her story. She was creating a shift, word by word. I know some people might say it's over. Why bring it up? But I believe if we don't speak out, it will keep happening. To someone else. Amara lifted her head, voice steady. "I stayed silent out of fear, but silence didn't protect me. It made me feel more alone. And it made people like Derek Langston believe they'd never be stopped." A few parents murmured. That name now carried scandal, but Amara didn't flinch. "I'm not telling this story for pity. I'm telling it so we can all reflect. A school can't just be a place for grades. It has to be a place of safety." She paused. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her, not with judgment, but attention. And that, for Amara, was the beginning of real change. After her speech, Amara left the stage to a round of thunderous applause. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her face was glowing. Ms. May greeted her with a gentle hug. "You've done something many adults still don't dare to do." Before Amara could respond, an event staff member approached and whispered, "A group of parents would like to meet you. Their children were once victims." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. In the waiting room, 3 parents stood as she entered. A middle-aged woman, eyes red and voice shaking, took Amara's hand. "My daughter nearly dropped out because of bullying. Thanks to you, she has hope again." Amara was speechless. In that moment, she realized her voice hadn't only saved herself, it was opening the path for many others. At the end of the seminar, Amara and Jalen left the school together under the dusky sky. They walked slowly along the stone path. Once a route she took with her head down. "How do you feel?" Jalen asked, hands in his jacket pockets. Amara took a deep breath, eyes following the dim glow of the streetlights. "Like I've put down a stone, but I know there's still a long road ahead." Jalen nodded. "I heard the school board is opening an internal investigation. Real change might happen." Amara smiled slightly. "I don't expect them to fix everything because of me. I just hope they stop ignoring the next person." Above them, the first star of the evening flickered. In Amara's heart, that tiny light began to guide a new path, one filled with hope. The next day at the school library, Amara sat alone by the window rereading an email from the local paper. We're preparing a follow-up article that delves deeper into those involved. If you're willing to share more, we'll protect your identity." She hovered her hand over the mouse, about to reply, then paused. Not from fear, but because something deeper was on her mind. A shadow moved across the table. Jalen sat down. "Haven't answered yet?" he asked. Amara nodded faintly. "I'm thinking. I don't want to just retell pain. If I continue, I want it to lead somewhere better." Jalen grinned. "Then you should write. I'll read it. And so will others." Amara looked out the window. The sun was rising high. She was no longer the girl afraid of the light. That afternoon, Amara walked home through the old neighborhood. The house where she had found her grandfather's letter stood quiet, the weathered fence still standing. She stopped at the gate, heart heavy. Inside, memories flooded in. Her flipping through an old book, reading the handwritten lines for the first time. The truth can be buried, but it never disappears. Amara pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the gate, not because it was pretty, but because it was where everything began. Then she opened her notes app and typed the first line for the article she'd submit to the paper. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a student who got tired of staying silent." She saved it, and kept walking. Her steps were steadier now. Her story, her truth, was no longer something to hide. That night in her small bedroom, Amara sat before her laptop. She reread the article draft, not to fix errors, but to affirm to herself she was ready. The headline read, "When a Student Speaks, A Journey from Fear to Truth." She clicked send, then sat still. There were no cheers, no witnesses. But it was a moment of release. She didn't need others to know she was right, only that she didn't have to hide anymore. Her phone buzzed. A message from a classmate. "I just saw your speech clip on the school page. Thanks for saying what I couldn't." Amara stared at the screen and smiled quietly. She had never imagined that what once made her cry could become the strength that helped others rise. On Monday morning, Amara walked into Millstone High with a different feeling. No more hugging the wall. No more rushing past others. A group of students were taping a large poster outside the student council room. "We won't be silent. Student Week Against Bullying." Amara stopped short when she saw her name at the bottom. Special Advisor Amara Brooks. She turned to Jalen, who was helping hang the poster. He winked. "We needed someone who really gets it." Amara said nothing. She simply stepped forward and smoothed out the crooked edge of the poster. Around them, students who had once stayed silent were starting to talk. Small greetings, nods of recognition. Not everything had changed, but one thing was clear. Millstone High was no longer just a place for fear. In class that day, Miss May returned the essays, with handwritten notes at the bottom. Amara read hers and paused. "Your voice is strong, your words sincere. You're not just learning language, you're using it to move people." A small line beneath made her stop. "If you're interested, I'll write you a recommendation for the Social Justice and Media Scholarship." She looked up at Ms. May, who gave her a small nod from across the room. Just months ago, Amara couldn't even read aloud in class. Now she was being encouraged to use her voice to go further. She leaned toward Jalen and whispered, "Maybe I'll actually apply." Jalen smiled. "I never doubted you." When the bell rang, Amara stepped into the hallway, with new faith in the future that was opening up. That afternoon, Amara sat in the quiet back courtyard of Millstone High. She pulled out her grandfather's old letter, its corners worn from how long she had held on to it. His voice echoed in her mind. "If you believe the truth deserves to be told, don't wait for permission." She read the last line again. "You can be the one to change it." Amara folded the letter and tucked it into her jacket pocket. She knew she wasn't the only one who had suffered, but if she was the first to speak up, maybe that was enough to start a ripple. A group of younger students walked by. One girl whispered, "That's Amara." Amara turned and gave a quiet nod. No more hiding. She wasn't just a silent shadow in the hallway anymore. She was the period that ended the silence. At the weekend event, Amara was invited to speak at the launch of Anti-Bullying Week, but this time there were no suspicious glances, no hushed whispers. She stood in the center of the schoolyard, microphone in hand. A breeze played with her hair. Hundreds of students watched her with attention. "We can't erase every wound," Amara said clearly, "but we can choose not to let it happen again." She glanced toward Jalen in the crowd. He gave a thumbs up. In the distance, Ms. May stood beside the principal, smiling. Amara ended with a call. "If you've ever stayed silent like I did, start speaking today. Not for the past, but for the future." Applause broke out like a wave. That moment was the beginning of a new kind of school. After the ceremony, Amara quietly walked away from the schoolyard, the evening sky bathed in golden orange. Laughter echoed behind her, but she didn't look back. She stopped by the iron gates of Millstone High, once the exit of her worst days. Now it was as the entrance to a new chapter. Amara pulled her grandfather's letter from her pocket and whispered, "I did it, Grandpa." She lifted her head, eyes no longer fearful. Her story didn't end in some grand victory, but in quiet growth. Of a girl who had once been afraid and now stood tall. She walked on, lighter than ever. And if you're hearing this, remember, silence doesn't protect you, but truth can change everything. Start speaking today.